It was a cold, biting morning when Raymond stopped the car at the edge of the forest. The wind whipped through the trees like a warning, and the pale, winter sun barely pierced the thick clouds above. Raymond stared out of the windshield, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. Beside him, his mother, Edith, sat in silence, her frail body hunched against the passenger seat, her eyes vacant, staring out at the endless stretch of trees. The car engine hummed softly, and the cold air, sharp and unforgiving, crept through the cracks in the window. Raymond took a deep breath and exhaled, his chest tight with a strange mix of fear, anticipation, and guilt. The plan had been months in the making, but now that he was here, standing on the precipice of his decision, he could feel the weight of it pressing down on him. A weight that threatened to crush him from the inside. "Mom," Raymond said, his voice hoarse. He turned to Edith, but she didn't react. She never did anymore. The Alzheimer's had taken so much from her, but the most painful loss for Raymond was how little of her remained. The woman who once filled his world with laughter, love, and care was now a shell, a body that moved, a face that smiled, but a mind that was slowly slipping away. "Mom, we're here," he said again, louder this time, shaking her shoulder lightly. Edith turned her head slowly, her eyes cloudy, trying to focus. For a brief moment, Raymond saw a flicker of recognition, a flash of the woman she had been. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by that vacant, confused look. She blinked a few times, her thin lips moving slightly. Where are we, Ray?" she asked, her voice weak, trembling with uncertainty. Raymond swallowed hard. His heart ached for her. But there was no turning back now. He had come this far, and he couldn't afford to feel sorry for her. He couldn't afford to let his emotions get in the way of what had to be done. "We're just taking a walk, Mom. Just a little walk in the woods, okay? Get some fresh air," he said, his voice steady, as though he were speaking to a child. He hoped his tone would reassure her, but deep down, he knew the truth. This wasn't just a walk. This was the moment when everything changed. He opened the door and stepped out into the cold. The snow crunched beneath his boots as he walked around to the other side of the car. Edith's frail hands gripped the seat as she struggled to push the door open. She was slow, unsteady, but Raymond helped her out of the car, guiding her with a practiced hand. "Careful, Mom," he said, his voice softer now, tinged with something that almost sounded like affection. But even as he spoke, a part of him was shutting down, locking away any feelings that might get in the way of what he had to do. They walked together toward the edge of the forest, the trees looming like silent sentinels in the distance. Edith's steps were slow, halting. Her balance unsteady as she shuffled through the snow. Raymond walked just ahead of her, always staying a few steps ahead, always watching, waiting. He had planned this moment so many times in his head, rehearsed the words, the actions. He knew exactly how it would unfold. But now that it was real, he wasn't sure he could go through with it. "Such a beautiful day," Edith said suddenly, her voice soft, almost childlike. Raymond glanced back at her, her face still blank, but she was smiling. It was the kind of smile that was both heartbreaking and comforting at the same time, a smile that spoke of a time long past, a time when she had been strong, vibrant, and fully present in the world around her. "Yeah, it is," he replied, forcing a smile of his own, though it didn't reach his eyes. His heart was racing now, his pulse pounding in his ears. This was it. This was the moment that would determine everything. He had made his decision, and there was no going back. They walked deeper into the woods, the trees growing thicker, their branches heavy with snow. The cold air cut through their clothes, biting at their skin. Raymond could feel the weight of the silence pressing in on him, and for a brief moment, he thought he heard the faint sound of footsteps behind him. He turned quickly, but there was no one there. Just Edith, shuffling along, her eyes blank, her movements slow and deliberate. The thought of what he was about to do made his stomach churn, but he pushed the feeling away. It was too late for regrets. He had thought it through, and he knew what had to be done. The life insurance policy, $500,000, was his ticket out. His debts were mounting, his life spiraling out of control, and this was the only way to fix it. The money would set him free, give him the life he had always dreamed of. It would solve everything. All he had to do was make sure his mother was gone, and it would be his. As they ventured deeper into the forest, Edith stumbled once, her fragile body wavering as she tried to regain her balance. Raymond's heart skipped a beat, and instinctively, he reached out to steady her. She didn't seem to notice, her mind too clouded to understand the danger. "Careful, Mom," Raymond murmured, his hand lingering on her arm for a moment longer than necessary. For a fleeting second, he thought about the life they had shared, the good times, the love, the laughter. He remembered her strength when he was young, her smile when he brought home a good report card, the way she comforted him when he scraped his knee. But those memories were fading fast, replaced by the cold reality of what had to be done. He had made his choice. And no matter how much it hurt, there was no turning back now. He glanced around the forest, checking for any signs of life. There was no one here. No one to stop him. The trees seemed to stretch on forever, their twisted branches reaching out like gnarled fingers. The air was thick with tension, as though the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. "Mom, I need you to stay here for a minute," Raymond said, his voice calm but firm. He turned to face her, his heart pounding in his chest. "I'll be right back. I just need to get something." Edith nodded slowly, as if she had understood, though Raymond wasn't sure she had. She was staring into the distance, her face expressionless. He turned away from her, his heart heavy with guilt, but he kept moving, pushing the feelings aside. He had to stay focused. The plan was simple. Leave her here. Walk away. Let the forest take its course. And when she was gone, the insurance money would be his. It would all be over. But as he walked away from her, a strange feeling washed over him. A sense of dread, of unease. He stopped for a moment, his breath coming in short bursts, his mind racing. What was he doing? How had it come to this? He could feel the cold air seeping into his bones, and for the first time, he wondered if he could really go through with it. He turned back to look at Edith. She was standing in the same spot, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the hem of her coat. Her eyes were distant, unfocused. She didn't understand what was happening, not really. But Raymond knew. He knew that once he left her there, he could never undo it. And then, from behind him, he heard it, a soft, distant sound, like the wind whispering through the trees. At first, he thought it was just the wind, but as the sound grew louder, he realized it was something else. "Raymond, where are you going?" It was Edith's voice, faint but unmistakable. Her words sent a jolt of fear through his chest. He froze, his breath caught in his throat. How could she still be aware enough to speak? He turned slowly, his heart pounding in his chest, as the guilt and fear began to suffocate him. Edith was still standing there, her face wrinkled with confusion, her eyes searching for him. She looked so vulnerable, so lost. Her frailty was a mirror of the way his own life had crumbled over the years, broken, empty, and full of regret. Raymond swallowed hard, forcing the words from his throat. I'm just going to get something. Wait here, okay?" But even as the words left his lips, he knew they were hollow. He wasn't coming back. Not the way he had been before. Not the man who had once loved her. This was a point of no return. And just as he began to turn away, the sound of Edith's footsteps reached his ears. They were faint, but they were there, soft and slow, crunching through the snow behind him. He could feel her presence, her fragile existence following him, no longer content to stay behind. The forest seemed to close in on him. The trees grew darker, the shadows deeper. Raymond realized that what he had planned, what he had hoped to achieve, might not be as simple as he thought. The realization came with a shock, a sudden understanding that his life, his entire future, was about to take a turn he hadn't anticipated. And in that moment, the weight of what he had done, what he was about to do, pressed down on him like 1,000 pounds. As the sound of Edith's footsteps grew louder, Raymond knew one thing for sure: nothing would ever be the same. Raymond's heart was pounding in his chest, the sound of Edith's slow, unsteady footsteps behind him sending shockwaves of fear and doubt through his body. He had made his decision. He had told himself it was necessary. But as the snow crunched under her feet, following him into the forest, a gnawing feeling began to creep up his spine, a feeling he couldn't ignore. He had planned everything so carefully. He had gone over the details in his mind again and again. Leave Edith in the forest, let the cold take her, wait for the inevitable phone call confirming her death. The life insurance policy, $500,000. Would be his. Finally, the escape he so desperately needed. The debts, the pressure, the failing relationships, all of it could be wiped clean. He would be free. But now, with every step he took, he began to doubt himself. Every crack of twigs beneath his boots, every rustling of branches, felt like a reminder that he wasn't alone in this. The forest was alive. It was watching. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't going to let him walk away so easily. He turned back, his eyes flicking nervously to where his mother was still walking behind him. Edith's frail form was barely visible in the distance, her hunched shoulders barely above the snowline. She was moving slowly, cautiously, her every step an effort. Raymond had always hated how slow she had become, how fragile. It was as if the illness had taken not just her memories but her ability to move through the world with any sense of independence. And now, he was about to take away the one thing that had tethered her to the world, her life. "Mom, you need to stay right here, okay?" he called back, trying to keep his voice calm, as if giving her some reassurance would ease the growing discomfort gnawing at him. She didn't answer, just continued walking with that vacant expression on her face. She had already forgotten the last thing he'd said to her. She'd probably forget the next thing too. It didn't matter. It was all part of the plan. Leave her. Leave her in the snow, let the cold take her where it always took the forgotten and abandoned. Raymond turned again, taking another few steps into the thickening woods, but his mind was racing. He had been so sure when he first planned it. It was a clean solution. Simple. But standing in the heart of the forest, in the cold and isolation, it suddenly felt wrong. A weight pressed down on his chest, something heavy and suffocating. He was about to turn back to check on Edith again when he heard something, a crack, sharp and sudden. Not from the snow or the branches. No. This was something else. Something heavier. Raymond's heart skipped a beat. The sound came again, closer this time. A movement through the trees. He was being watched. The thought sent a chill up his spine. He glanced over his shoulder and caught a fleeting glimpse of Edith. She had stopped. Was she waiting for him? Did she even understand what was going on? Was she confused again? "Mom!" Raymond called, his voice cracking with sudden panic. "Come on. We need to keep going." But Edith stood motionless, her hands clasped together in front of her. She was looking at something in the distance, or perhaps at nothing at all. Raymond wasn't sure. Her mind had slipped so far, the connections between past and present were frayed beyond recognition. The things she said, the words that sometimes made sense, were growing fewer. And yet, there was something in the way she stood there, something in her stillness, that sent a shiver through his body. He had to move. The longer he stayed here, the more difficult it would be to pull away. The guilt was already gnawing at him, digging its claws deeper and deeper with every passing second. Raymond started to walk faster, his boots crunching harder against the snow as he pushed himself through the thick forest, trying to put distance between himself and the sickening feeling that was spreading through him. The branches of the trees seemed to close in around him, twisting like skeletal fingers reaching for him. The cold air bit into his skin, but it was the dread in his chest that made him feel like he was suffocating. Why was he doing this? How had he come to this point? The thought of his mother, her fragile mind, her trusting eyes, he couldn't escape it. No matter how much he told himself it was all for the greater good, for freedom from the crushing weight of his life, a part of him was screaming to stop. But he couldn't stop. Not now. Not when the plan was already in motion. He walked faster, his breath coming in ragged bursts as he pushed through the snow. He needed to get far enough away. He needed to disappear for just a little while, to let the forest do its work. Then, the silence of the woods shattered with a loud, jarring crack. A low rumble reverberated through the ground beneath his feet. Raymond froze. His heart stopped. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an animal. This sound was different. This was something else. He turned, his eyes wide in terror. Behind him, something massive stirred in the shadows. There was a flicker of movement, a shape, too big to be a mere animal, moving swiftly through the trees. His breath caught in his throat. What the hell was that? The wind howled, the branches above swaying violently. The shadows seemed to come alive as the forest grew darker, the dense trees closing in like walls. Panic surged in his veins, his heart pounding so loudly he couldn't hear anything else. Then, Edith's voice pierced the silence. It was faint at first, like a distant echo. Raymond. Her voice cracked like brittle glass. Raymond whipped around, his eyes darting through the trees. She was still standing there, in the same spot. Was she calling him? Or was it just another fragment of her broken mind speaking out of the fog? He took a step back toward her. "Mom, I'm coming," he shouted, his feet slipping in the snow as he moved quickly toward her. But the sound behind him, this time, louder, sent his heart into a tailspin. Before he could make another move, the air seemed to shift. A strange pressure fell over him, a force so heavy it was hard to breathe. He looked up to see dark clouds gathering rapidly above, thickening like an impending storm. "Raymond." Her voice again, but this time it wasn't just distant. It was desperate. Raymond turned around and ran. The cold stung his face, but he barely felt it now. His legs burned, his breath came in ragged gasps, but the terror was pulling him forward, driving him. The dark shape behind him was growing nearer, the sound of branches snapping with its movement sending chills down his spine. "Mom! I'm coming," he screamed, pushing through the snow. But his feet were slipping now, the ground turning treacherous as the snow began to swirl around him. He reached the place where he'd left her, but when he looked up, Edith was gone. His breath stopped in his throat. "Mom," he shouted, his voice cracking as he spun around, eyes searching the dense trees. "Edith. Where are you?" Nothing. The forest was silent again. The wind stilled. The clouds hung low above him like a dark curtain. Then, suddenly, out of the corner of his eye, he saw it. A movement. Something small and white, just beyond the trees. He turned his head sharply, but there was nothing there. Only the forest, still and quiet. He took a tentative step forward, unsure, his heart racing. Every instinct was screaming at him to leave, to run. But something held him there. Then, a figure appeared. Edith. She was standing just a few yards away, facing away from him. Her back was turned, her hands trembling at her sides. Her body swayed in place, as though she were waiting. Raymond felt a chill sweep through him. He called out, "Mom." She didn't move. Didn't respond. He took another step toward her, but something in the air shifted. And then, he heard it. A low, guttural sound. It wasn't from Edith. It was from behind her. He stopped dead in his tracks. Something else was out there. Something watching him. Raymond stood motionless, frozen in place by the sight of his mother, Edith, standing so eerily still in the woods. His breath, shallow and rapid, echoed in the silence around him. The cold, sharp wind bit at his skin, but it was the terror in his chest that made him feel as if he were suffocating. Her frail body swayed gently with the wind, her thin coat flapping against her slight frame. But it wasn't her movements that chilled him to the bone. It was her complete lack of awareness. She was staring blankly ahead, her hands trembling at her sides, but her eyes were empty, lifeless. She didn't even react when Raymond called out to her. "Mom," he shouted, his voice breaking with urgency. His feet were frozen in place as though some invisible force was keeping him rooted to the snow-covered ground. He took a step toward her, his body trembling, but something stopped him in his tracks. He could feel it again, a shift in the air, a presence watching him from the depths of the forest. His pulse quickened, and for the first time, Raymond felt a deep, gnawing fear crawl up his spine. This wasn't just about his mother anymore. Something had changed. Something was watching him, something that wasn't just the forest or the cold winter wind. The air around him seemed thick with a strange energy, and as his eyes darted around, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being hunted. A low, guttural noise came from somewhere in the distance, but it wasn't an animal. It was something else, something darker. The sound wasn't clear, but it seemed to reverberate in his bones. Raymond turned toward the trees, straining his eyes to catch any sign of movement, but there was nothing. "Mom," he whispered, taking another step forward, his voice shaky but determined. He had to get her out of here. He had to finish what he had started, no matter how difficult it was to face the reality of his actions. But as he neared Edith, something strange happened. She turned her head slowly, her eyes unfocused, as though she had finally heard him, but there was no recognition in them. She blinked, the motion slow and deliberate, as though struggling to remember what she was supposed to do. She didn't speak. She didn't smile. She just stared at him with that vacant, hollow gaze, like a lost soul adrift in a world she could no longer comprehend. The silence between them was deafening. Raymond's throat tightened as he struggled to find the words to break it. "Mom. You're okay. It's going to be okay," he said, but the words felt hollow, empty. How could he reassure her when he was the one who had put them both in this position? She blinked again, her eyes narrowing as though she were trying to focus on him. Then, she whispered in a voice so faint, it could barely be heard over the wind. "Raymond, what are you doing?" Her words struck him like a blow to the chest. It was the first time in so long that Edith had spoken with any sense of clarity, the first time that she had seemed like the mother he had once known. The woman who had raised him, who had loved him unconditionally, was still buried somewhere beneath the layers of confusion and forgetfulness. For a brief moment, Raymond felt a flicker of hope, a spark that maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance to redeem himself. But the fleeting moment of hope was quickly smothered by the weight of reality. He could still hear the strange noise in the distance, the rumbling sound that had been growing louder, closer. He turned again, but still, there was nothing. The forest was silent except for the howling wind. "Mom, we need to go," Raymond said, his voice frantic now. He reached out to take her arm, but she pulled away, her frail body trembling as she stepped back, away from him. "No," she said, her voice weak but insistent. "Not yet. We can't go yet, Raymond." The word sent a cold shiver through his spine. He had to get her out of here. He couldn't stay any longer. Something was wrong, and he could feel the walls closing in. The forest, the trees, the snow, all of it seemed to be pressing in on him, suffocating him. "Mom," he urged, desperation creeping into his voice. "We need to go. It's too cold out here." We can't stay. But Edith didn't move. Instead, she turned her head, slowly, to gaze out into the distance, her expression unreadable. Mom? Raymond asked, stepping closer. What's wrong? Edith remained silent, her body trembling ever so slightly. Raymond's breath hitched as he realized something he had been trying to ignore, something that had been gnawing at him since the moment he had left her alone in the woods. She wasn't just lost in her own confusion. She wasn't just struggling to remember where she was or what was happening. She knew something. She could feel it too. The air was thick with a sense of foreboding, a dark presence that neither of them could escape. And then, just as quickly as the feeling had settled over him, it lifted. The tension, the strange pressure in the air, seemed to dissipate as if the forest itself had exhaled a deep breath, releasing its grip on Raymond's mind. He swallowed hard, trying to steady himself. Maybe it was just his mind playing tricks on him. Maybe it was the stress, the guilt, the fear, it was all starting to blur together. Raymond, Edith said again, her voice a whisper in the wind. He turned to her, his heart racing as she finally spoke again. I know what you're doing. The word sent a jolt of terror through him. His blood ran cold. His stomach churned as the weight of her words settled over him. She knew. Somehow, she knew what he had planned. Mom, what are you talking about? Raymond stammered, his voice trembling. Edith's eyes locked onto his with an intensity that surprised him. I know what you were going to do to me, she said, her voice barely audible but filled with a quiet, tragic knowing. Raymond felt the world tilt beneath his feet. His body went numb. For a moment, he couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The guilt that had been festering inside him now came crashing down, a tidal wave of remorse and fear. He had always known that his mother was still aware of things, that there were moments when the fog of Alzheimer's lifted just enough for her to see the truth. But this was beyond anything he had expected. No, Raymond whispered, his voice cracking. No, Mom, you don't understand. I understand more than you think, Edith interrupted, her voice cold and distant. I know why you brought me here. I know what you wanted. Raymond took a step back, his chest tightening with a sense of panic he couldn't control. His mother's words were sinking in, each one like a stone in his gut. He had thought he could get away with it. He had thought that leaving her in the woods, abandoning her to the cold, would be the easy way out. But now, the consequences of his actions were crashing down on him, and he didn't know how to stop it. I'm sorry, Mom, he whispered, his voice breaking. I never meant for any of this to happen. I just wanted. But Edith didn't let him finish. She reached out, her trembling hand brushing his cheek. It was a gesture of tenderness, but it was also a reminder of everything that had gone wrong. The woman he had once known was slipping away, but there was still enough of her left to make him feel the full weight of his betrayal. You don't get it, Raymond, Edith said softly. The forest will never let you leave. It knows what you've done. It will take more than just me. Raymond's breath caught in his throat. The words were nonsensical, absurd even. But something in her tone, something in the way she looked at him, made him feel like there was more truth in them than he cared to admit. Mom, he said, his voice desperate. We need to go. Now. But Edith shook her head slowly. You can't go back, Raymond. Not after what you've done. The air around them seemed to grow colder, the trees looming like silent witnesses to the dark deed that had been set in motion. Raymond's heart raced as he realized that something far greater than his mother's illness, far greater than his own guilt, was at play here. The forest had a hold on them. It was waiting for something. And Raymond was certain that whatever it was coming. A crack of thunder rumbled through the sky, breaking the stillness like a gunshot. The wind picked up, howling through the trees, as if the forest itself was alive, moving in response to the tension that had been building between them. And then, from the darkness beyond the trees, something stirred. Raymond's eyes went wide with terror. It was coming. The wind howled through the trees, whipping Raymond's face as he stood frozen in place, staring at Edith. Her eyes, those hollow, vacant eyes, bore into him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. She wasn't the same woman she had been. There was something else there now, something he couldn't comprehend, something that had awoken in her the moment she had spoken those chilling words. "You can't go back, Raymond," Edith's voice was soft but laced with an undeniable finality. "Not after what you've done." Her words reverberated in his chest, each one striking like a drumbeat in the quiet, snow-covered woods. For a moment, Raymond stood there, unable to move, unable to breathe. He wanted to believe it was just his mind playing tricks on him. The isolation, the guilt, the mounting fear. It had to be. But deep down, in the pit of his stomach, he felt a cold certainty. Something was wrong. Something far beyond what he had expected. The darkness of the forest seemed to close in on him, the towering trees standing like silent sentinels watching, waiting. The air was thick with tension, as though the very earth beneath his feet was holding its breath. Edith's eyes flicked away from him for a moment, as though something had caught her attention in the distance. Her body trembled, and Raymond could see the faintest glimmer of recognition in her gaze. But it was fleeting, gone before he could reach out to her. "Mom," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind. "Please, we need to leave. Now." He stepped forward, his legs heavy and slow, as though the snow itself were trying to pull him back. Every movement felt like wading through thick mud, the weight of the guilt and fear pressing down on him. Edith's head snapped back to him, her eyes widening in a strange mix of sadness and something darker, something that chilled him to the core. "It's too late, Raymond," she said, her voice shaking with what seemed like a mix of resignation and dread. "The forest knows what you've done." The words hit him like a physical blow. He staggered back, his breath catching in his throat. He tried to push them away, tell himself it was just the ramblings of a woman lost to her illness, but he couldn't. There was a part of him, the part that had been growing more anxious with every passing minute, that believed her. The forest. It was watching them. It was waiting. And Raymond felt trapped in a nightmare that had no end. "Mom, please," he said, his voice breaking. "You don't understand. I didn't want this. I didn't." Before he could finish, a loud crack echoed through the forest, so sharp and sudden that it made his heart leap in his chest. It was followed by a series of strange, rhythmic sounds. Like footsteps, but too heavy to be human. Too deliberate. Raymond's head snapped around, his eyes darting frantically through the trees. Something was moving out there. The rumbling sounds grew louder, coming closer, and Raymond could feel the ground vibrating beneath his feet. His breath quickened, his pulse racing in his ears. What was that? What was out there? Edith didn't seem to hear it. She just stood there, her gaze distant, lost in a world only she could see. The expression on her face was one of utter detachment, as though she had already accepted whatever fate was coming for them. But Raymond couldn't accept it. He wouldn't. He reached out, grabbing her by the shoulders, shaking her gently. "Mom! Listen to me." His voice was desperate now, filled with the raw panic of a man who knew he was running out of time. "We have to leave. Now." Her body jerked slightly at his touch, but her eyes remained unfocused. She looked through him, as though he weren't there at all. Then, without warning, her lips parted, and she whispered in a voice so quiet. He almost didn't hear it. "It's here." The air around them seemed to freeze. The wind died down, and for a brief moment, everything went still. The unnatural silence stretched out, filling the space between them with an ominous weight. "Mom," Raymond said, his voice trembling. "What do you mean?" But Edith didn't answer. She simply turned her head slowly, her eyes moving to the trees ahead of them, a faraway look in them. Raymond followed her gaze, his heart pounding in his chest. He saw nothing. Just the twisted trunks of the trees, their bare branches reaching toward the sky like skeletal hands. There was no movement, no sign of life, only the oppressive silence of the forest. But that didn't ease the growing sense of dread in his gut. It felt like the calm before a storm, unnatural, suffocating. Suddenly, the ground beneath them rumbled again, this time more violently, and the trees shook as if something large and heavy were approaching. Raymond spun around, his eyes searching the shadows for any sign of what was coming. His breath came in ragged bursts, his body tense with fear. "Mom, we need to move. Now." But Edith didn't respond. She was staring into the distance, her face as pale as the snow beneath her feet. Her body trembled violently, her eyes wide with terror. "It's coming," she whispered. "It's coming for us." Raymond grabbed her by the arm, pulling her toward him, his mind screaming at him to get her out of here. But as he turned to leave, something stopped him. Something in the forest, something he couldn't see, but could feel. The pressure in the air grew heavier, and the trees seemed to close in around them. The path behind them had disappeared, swallowed up by the shifting snow. "Mom, we can't stay here," Raymond said, his voice frantic. But Edith wasn't listening. She was staring into the darkness, her eyes fixed on something only she could see. "There's no escape, Raymond," she murmured. "We're already here." Before Raymond could respond, the rumbling grew louder, closer. The ground beneath their feet seemed to quake with each passing second. And then, from the depths of the forest, came the sound, a low, guttural growl, deep and powerful, like the roar of some monstrous creature. Raymond's heart stopped. His eyes widened in terror. He turned toward Edith, his mouth opening to say something, anything, but no words came. The growl grew louder, filling the air around them with a suffocating intensity. Something was coming. Something that was not human. Something that had been waiting. And they were caught in its sights. "Mom," Raymond whispered, his voice barely audible over the growing noise. "We need to run." But Edith didn't move. She simply stood there, her body shaking, her eyes filled with a quiet horror. "It's too late," she said softly, her voice breaking. "The forest has already claimed us." The rumble grew louder, and Raymond could feel the ground tremble beneath him. His entire body shook with fear as the growl turned into something else, a deep, resonant roar that echoed through the trees. The sound was deafening, overwhelming, as though the very earth itself were alive and angry. Raymond's thoughts scrambled. He had to get out of here. He had to get Edith out. But how? There was no way out. The trees, the snow, the darkness, they were all closing in on him. There was nowhere to run. And then, as if on cue, the snowstorm erupted. The sky above them darkened, the wind whipping violently as snow began to fall in thick, heavy flakes, swirling around them like a blinding blizzard. Through the haze of snow, Raymond saw it. A shadow, moving swiftly through the trees. It was large, impossibly large, and it moved with a terrifying speed. Its form was almost too dark to make out, but the shape was unmistakable, a hulking figure, its movements fluid and predatory. Raymond's heart raced as the creature drew closer. He could hear it now, the sound of its heavy steps crunching in the snow, each one resonating in his chest. He could feel the weight of its presence pressing down on him, suffocating him. And then, before he could react, the creature was upon them. Raymond's heart raced, every beat echoing in his ears as the creature loomed closer, its massive shadow stretching long across the snow-covered ground. The wind howled, but it was nothing compared to the deafening roar of the beast, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from deep within the earth itself. The hairs on the back of Raymond's neck stood on end, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he pulled Edith closer, desperate to shield her from whatever was coming. Her frail body trembled in his arms, her eyes wide, unblinking, as she stared into the blizzard-like snowstorm. She had long since stopped speaking, her body trembling with a fear Raymond could not understand. He had never seen his mother like this. Lost, vacant, but also somehow more aware than ever, as though she could see something he couldn't. "There's nowhere to hide, Raymond," Edith whispered hoarsely, her voice barely audible above the howling wind. "It's already here." Raymond's chest tightened at her words. He had thought he could outrun his past, leave the consequences of his actions behind. But this was no longer just a matter of guilt and regret. Something far darker had taken hold of the woods, and he and Edith were at its mercy. The snowstorm intensified, swirling around them in thick, blinding sheets. Raymond squinted through the flurry, trying to make out the shape of the creature. It was still out there, lurking in the storm, but it wasn't moving closer, not yet. It was waiting. Watching. His breath caught in his throat. What was it? What was this thing that had come for them? The ground shook beneath his feet once more, and he could feel the vibration in his bones, as though the very earth was alive with fury. The trees groaned under the pressure, their branches creaking like old bones. The storm was relentless, the wind screaming through the woods as Raymond clutched Edith tightly, his mind racing for answers. There had to be a way out. There had to be something, anything, that could break the hold this place had over them. But all around him, the forest seemed to close in, the trees leaning toward them like sentient beings, their bare limbs reaching out to trap them. "Mom," Raymond whispered, his voice cracking. "Please, tell me what to do. What is this? What is it?" But Edith didn't respond. She just stood there, her eyes still fixed on the darkened forest, as though she could see beyond the veil of snow. It was as if she had already accepted their fate, as though the terror that had gripped Raymond had long since passed her by. For a long moment, Raymond stood frozen, his thoughts a chaotic whirl of fear, regret, and guilt. His eyes darted back and forth between the shadows in the forest and his mother, who seemed lost to him in some distant place. And then, as if sensing his growing desperation, Edith spoke again. "You can't escape, Raymond," she said, her voice soft, but carrying an unshakable weight. "You should have known this would happen. You should have known you couldn't outrun the consequences." Her words struck him like a slap to the face, and he recoiled, feeling the full force of his mother's disapproval. But it wasn't just her words, it was the cold, knowing way she spoke them, as if she had always known what was coming. A sudden chill washed over him, the air growing colder, the snow falling heavier, and for a brief moment, Raymond felt the crushing weight of inevitability settle over him. "This is because of me, isn't it?" Raymond whispered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "What I did, it's all because of me, isn't it?" Edith didn't answer, but the way she looked at him, the way her eyes seemed to pierce through him, spoke volumes. It was as if the forest itself had chosen him as its victim, its prey, and no matter how far he ran or how hard he fought, there was no escaping its reach. A loud crack split the air, and Raymond's eyes shot up to the trees. A branch, thick and gnarled, snapped in half and fell with a deafening thud. The creature, whatever it was still out there, and it was closing in. Raymond's heart pounded in his chest as he turned toward Edith, who was now looking at him with an unreadable expression. Her eyes, those once vibrant eyes that had been full of love and warmth, were now empty, hollow. The terror that had gripped her earlier was gone, replaced by a cold resignation, as though she had already accepted whatever was coming. "I'm sorry, Mom," Raymond said, the guilt threatening to overwhelm him. "I never wanted this. I never meant for any of this to happen." But Edith didn't respond. She just reached out, her frail hand trembling as she touched his cheek. The gesture was tender, but it carried a weight of finality. Of an understanding that Raymond wasn't sure he could bear. "You can't undo what you've done," Edith said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The forest has already taken its toll. You can't run from it now. Raymond's chest tightened, and his throat closed up. He had no words left, no more apologies to give. His mind was a blur of terror and confusion as he turned once more to the darkened forest. He could still feel the creature's presence out there, stalking them, waiting for the right moment to strike. The growling intensified, louder now, shaking the ground beneath them. Raymond's blood ran cold as the shadows in the snow began to shift. The creature was getting closer. In that moment, Raymond made a choice, a decision born out of desperation and sheer terror. He turned toward Edith, his voice shaking as he whispered, "We need to run." But Edith, once again, did not move. She didn't even react. Her eyes remained fixed on the forest, on the darkness that had already swallowed everything around them. "I can't leave, Raymond," she said, her voice barely audible, but filled with an almost unnatural calm. "You can run, but you can't escape what's coming. You never could." Raymond's breath hitched as he turned to look into the depths of the forest. The snowstorm swirled around him, the wind howling like a wild animal, but all he could focus on was the deep, growing sense of dread that wrapped itself around his chest. The creature was near, closer now than ever before. Suddenly, a massive shape loomed out of the darkness, moving with terrifying speed. Raymond's heart skipped a beat as the creature emerged from the shadows, its enormous form barely visible through the falling snow. It was too large, too powerful to be any animal Raymond had ever seen. Its body was massive, covered in dark, matted fur, its eyes glowing with a malevolent intensity. It moved like a predator. Silent, calculated, and deadly. Raymond's knees buckled beneath him, and for a split second, he felt paralyzed by fear. The creature's gaze fixed on him, its eyes gleaming with something that felt far more intelligent than any wild animal. It was as if it understood him, understood what he had done, and it was coming for him. Without thinking, Raymond grabbed Edith's arm and tried to pull her with him, but she resisted. Her body was stiff, unyielding, as though some force stronger than him was holding her in place. "Mom!" Raymond screamed, panic rising in his chest. "We have to go. We have to leave now." But Edith's voice, calm and quiet, answered him with a terrifying certainty. "There's nowhere to run, Raymond. It's already here." The creature moved closer, its massive form emerging fully from the shadows, its breath visible in the cold air. Raymond could hear it now, the steady thud of its footsteps, the low rumble in its throat as it growled. The thing was no longer just a shape in the darkness, it was real. It was here. Raymond's breath came in desperate, ragged gasps as he turned, pulling Edith behind him, knowing that there was no escape. The forest had already claimed them. The creature had already chosen them as its prey. And there was no way out. The creature moved closer, its monstrous form cutting through the swirling snowstorm like a specter from a nightmare. The air felt thick with menace as Raymond's heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing in the deep, silent forest. Time seemed to slow, the world shrinking down to a single, horrifying truth: there was no escape. Raymond tried to move, tried to drag Edith with him, but she remained still, as if rooted to the spot by an invisible force. Her eyes, dull and distant, were fixed on the creature, and a strange calm had settled over her. The terror that had overtaken her earlier was gone, replaced by an eerie acceptance of their fate. "Mom!" Raymond screamed, his voice cracking with panic. "Please! We have to go." But Edith didn't respond. She didn't even flinch as the beast loomed closer. Its glowing eyes were locked on Raymond now, the malice within them undeniable. It was watching him, studying him, as if it understood the depth of his guilt, the horror of his actions. It knew him, knew everything about him. And it was coming for him. The wind howled louder, the storm growing even more intense, but Raymond could hear the creature's low growl clearly now, a guttural sound that vibrated through the ground beneath him. The noise was almost hypnotic, as though it were calling to him, pulling him in. He tried again, tugging on Edith's arm, his desperation growing. But she was unyielding, her body stiff and lifeless against him. The creature was so close now that Raymond could see the details of its massive form, a hulking, terrifying creature, its fur matted and dark, its breath steaming in the cold air. "There's nowhere to run," Edith whispered softly, her voice like a cold wind. "The forest has claimed us, Raymond. It always does." Raymond's chest tightened with an unbearable weight as he looked into her eyes, searching for any sign of recognition, any flicker of the mother he had known. But there was nothing. Only emptiness. Only the forest. He wanted to scream, wanted to fight back against the inevitability of it all. He had made so many mistakes, hurt so many people, and now it was all coming back to him in the form of this monster. This thing that had been waiting for him, watching him, as if it had been following him all his life, biding its time until the moment was right. With one final, desperate effort, Raymond pulled Edith with him, running into the forest, away from the creature that loomed behind them. But it was too late. The snowstorm, the trees, the forest itself, it all seemed to close in on him, trapping him in a cold, suffocating embrace. The beast's growl grew louder, its steps reverberating through the ground, and Raymond could hear its breath, hot and heavy, just behind him. "Mom, please," he cried, his voice hoarse with fear. "Please, wake up. We have to go." But Edith remained motionless, her expression frozen in a state of tragic resignation. The growl from the creature echoed around them like thunder. Raymond felt it in his bones. The trees trembled, their branches creaking and groaning as if they were alive, as if the entire forest was shifting, moving, reacting to the creature's presence. Raymond turned his head, desperate to see where the beast was, but he couldn't see it through the thickening snow. All he could hear was the rhythmic pounding of its massive footsteps. It was closing in on them. "Mom!" Raymond shouted one last time, shaking her desperately. "We can't stay here. You have to help me." But it was as though she was no longer in her body, as though the woman who had once been his mother had vanished, leaving only a shell behind. Edith's vacant eyes stared into the storm, her lips barely moving as she whispered, "It's too late, Raymond. You never had a chance." A terrible silence followed. The growl of the creature ceased, replaced by a quiet, almost reverent stillness. Raymond felt the cold creep deeper into his skin, into his bones. His entire body trembled, not from the cold, but from the terrifying realization that the creature was standing directly behind him, and he was utterly powerless. He turned, his heart in his throat, and there it was. The creature stood just a few feet away, its massive form towering over him, its eyes glowing with an unnatural, predatory light. It was like nothing he had ever seen, a mix of animal and something far darker, far older. Its fur was dark and matted, its muscles rippling beneath its thick coat. But it was its eyes that truly terrified him, eyes that seemed to see through him, that seemed to know every secret he had ever kept, every sin he had committed. Raymond's knees buckled beneath him as the creature stepped forward, its claws scraping the frozen earth with a sickening noise. It was slow, deliberate, as though savoring the moment. Raymond could hear his own breath, shallow and frantic, as he backed away from it, unable to tear his gaze away from its malevolent eyes. "You can't escape it, Raymond," Edith's voice broke through the silence, her words almost a whisper. "The forest is alive. And it has chosen you." Raymond's eyes flew to her, searching for some sign of recognition, some hint of the mother he had once known. But there was nothing. Just the hollow stare of a woman lost to the madness of the forest. The creature's eyes locked on him again, its gaze burning into his soul. And then it spoke. It was a voice that wasn't a voice, a sound that reverberated inside Raymond's head, chilling him to the core. It was as though the creature spoke not with its mouth, but directly into his mind. "You have been marked. There is no escape. The words cut through him like a blade, slicing through his fear, his confusion, his guilt. He knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that the creature was not just some wild animal. It was something older, something far darker, something tied to the very earth itself. The creature's massive form loomed over him, and Raymond felt a sense of inevitability wash over him. It was coming. There was no escaping it. He took a step back, his chest tight with panic, but the creature didn't move. It was as though it were waiting for something, for the final moment. And in that moment, Raymond understood. This was not just about survival. This was about reckoning. About facing the consequences of everything he had ever done, the lies, the betrayal, the abandonment. The things he had tried to outrun, but never could. You can't hide, the creature's voice echoed in his mind, as though mocking him. You cannot escape what you have become. Raymond's knees buckled as the weight of the truth pressed down on him. He was not a man running from the consequences of his actions anymore. He was something far worse. He was part of the forest now, part of the darkness that had claimed so many before him. The creature took a step forward, and Raymond stumbled back, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He had nowhere to run. The snowstorm was a blur around him, the trees a maze of dark, twisted branches. The forest had swallowed him whole, and there was no way out. As the creature closed the distance between them, Raymond's thoughts scattered, but one thing remained clear, the realization that he had made a choice long ago. A choice that had led him here, to this moment, to this reckoning. The creature's glowing eyes burned into his soul, and Raymond fell to his knees, unable to stand against the weight of his guilt. And then, with a single, terrifying motion, the creature lunged.